the secret Swiss strategy that kept Hitler at bay during World War II. Nestled in the Central Alps lies Switzerland, a country often seen as the aloof sideliner of Europe. Known for its strict adherence to neutrality during the Second World War, Switzerland has garnered a unique reputation. However, Switzerland's history and its strategic choices during the war help explain the course it took to survive the coming storm. During World War II, the Swiss military extensively used the Swiss K, a commercially available version of the infamous German Enigma machine, to encrypt vital intelligence and communications. This piece of technology became a crucial part of Switzerland's defense strategy, reflecting the nation's determination to maintain its sovereignty in the face of overwhelming threats. Switzerland's creation of a federal constitution in 1848 marked it as one of the oldest modern republics in the world, but its security was not always guaranteed. Once sandwiched between empires, the rise of fascism found Switzerland caught between the ambitions of Mussolini's Italy to the south and Hitler's Germany to the north. Still, the Swiss held firm, having declared their neutrality in March 1938. Thanks to a long-standing tradition of active neutrality, fascist elements remained weak in Swiss society, much weaker than in other European countries at the time. A combination of national spirit and Swiss cultural norms helped support their commitment to independence. As tensions deepened throughout Europe, Switzerland saw the need to reduce its reliance on food imports. Dr. Fritz Wallen, a government official, initiated a program to increase arable land and promote pig breeding, boosting non-fodder-based livestock across the country. Wallen also pressed to cut back the raising of cattle, which drastically reduced the production of fodder and increased the surface of arable land, allowing for an abundance of grain to be produced over the coming years. Alarmed by German expansion in 1938, the Swiss government raised the age limit for compulsory military service to 60, hoping to draw recruits from their pool of roughly 4.3 million citizens by the war's outbreak. Most of these mobilized citizens were trained marksmen thanks to the widespread ownership of firearms among the Swiss population. As President Philipp Eder once remarked, "The Swiss will never part with his gun, symbol, and protection of his freedom and independence." In effect, the Swiss army was to be a citizens' army based on universal military training, service in the reserves, and the keeping of arms and ammunition at home. Leading the Swiss military was General Henry Guisan, Commander-in-Chief of the Swiss Army. Elected on August 30th, 1939, General Guisan quickly became popular thanks to his extensive mobilization efforts and defensive preparations aimed at protecting the country at all costs. Under Guisan's leadership, the slogan of spiritual national defense echoed throughout all cantons of Switzerland. This term became a rallying cry for the nation as it faced the most powerful threat in its history. 2 days after Germany's fateful invasion of Poland, the number of mobilized Swiss citizens totaled 435,000, with an additional 1,000 volunteer sharpshooters helping bolster these numbers later in the month. Throughout September, the Swiss remained diligent in their preparations and defenses. Servicemen across the country were building field fortifications, artillery positions, tank traps, hidden concrete-covered trenches, and machine gun nests. Bridges were mined, and road obstacles were set in place. President Eder declared, "If war extends to our country, it will find us ready. Men, women, soldiers, civilians, old and young, all of whom swear to give their life to their country, preferring death rather than slavery." In early October 1940, as the fall of Poland reached its completion, General Guisan intensified planning for an expected invasion. These plans included contingencies for Case West, a French incursion into Swiss territory, and the more likely Case North, a German invasion to outflank the Maginot Line through the Alps. Guisan issued Operation Order No. 2, which described critical positions in the north that were to be held up to the last cartridge. As German troop concentrations gathered on the southern border, November and December saw the Swiss continue in their efforts to reshape their nation into a fortified mountain redoubt. The Germans were aware of these developments with High Command estimating that it would take the Wehrmacht 40 days to cross Switzerland, and that it would be necessary to oppose the Swiss Five, one to achieve it. In a stark contrast to Germany's blitzkrieg theory, the Swiss opted for a defensive strategy, hoping to contain the enemy's mechanized attack within smaller, contained zones, bogging them down in slow, methodical, and brutal engagements. During the phony war period from September 1939 to May 1940, the mood was tense on the Western Front. For Switzerland, however, things were only ramping up. Since the previous September, the Swiss military had been dealing with aerial violations over Swiss airspace. By now, Swiss anti-aircraft batteries had opened fire on both French and German warplanes that chose to stray over their border. The Battle of France, which began on May 10, 1940, was Switzerland's first major test of resolve. On the first day of Germany's invasion into France, Swiss anti-aircraft guns and fighters engaged both German and French aircraft crossing Swiss airspace. 27 German bombs landed in northern Switzerland, damaging a railway. As the Battle of France raged on, Luftwaffe incursions into Swiss airspace became more common, and the Swiss Air Force harshly expelled the Germans through repeated sorties against any intruding aircraft. More German bombers were shot down in early June, with a noted dogfight involving 29 German bombers and fighter bombers against a dozen Swiss fighters over Chaux-de-Fonds in western Switzerland. 2 German and 1 Swiss plane were shot down. After the fall of France on June 10th, Switzerland quickly found itself surrounded in Europe. For a brief period, Swiss morale wavered with the defeat of their French neighbors. However, efforts by General Guesson rallied his people to the cause of national defense. With plenty of food and ammunition stockpiled, Guesson's National Redoubt Plan would see the bulk of the army abandon the Swiss plateau and take up position in the nation's fortified mountain ranges, from where it could resist an invader for many months. All relevant industry and infrastructure would be blown up the Second and Axis Army set foot on Swiss soil. With this strategy, Guesson hoped to deter the Germans from embarking on a likely highly costly and time-intensive campaign, especially with Britain still in the war. Another way for the Swiss to evade invasion was to acquiesce to some Axis demands. For one, Switzerland felt forced to submit to Berlin's demands for free commercial transit and for access to Swiss financial services. Notably, the Swiss also allowed German and Italian military supply trains to pass through its borders, for which they charged the Axis, even while Germany halted the export of coal to Switzerland and severely lessened the export of food. Meanwhile, Swiss air defenses were still dealing with incursions, this time from retaliatory strikes by the British Royal Air Force, who mistakenly hit Swiss targets, thinking them to be German. Despite these challenges, the Swiss remained grimly determined in their air war against both the Allied and Axis powers. While the Swiss military was busy shoring up defenses through troop concentrations and air patrols, another key part of Switzerland's defense was espionage and intelligence. Swiss intelligence had established a reliable spy network across Europe to help notify them of important developments in the war. One agency, known as the Bureau Haas, used the Viking Line spy network to tap directly into Adolf Hitler's own headquarters. Starting in 1941, Switzerland took on an increasingly diplomatic role on the world stage, representing the interests of the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and Germany, among others. Still, the Swiss government refused to recognize Axis conquests and continued to host the occupied nation's embassies in Bern, resulting in many scathing attacks against the country from the Nazi press. Another stress upon the Swiss cause for non-alignment came in 1942 when the Germans occupied Vichy France, all but isolating the Swiss from the rest of Europe. Until 1943, all Jewish refugees fleeing the Vichy regime into Switzerland were refused entry, rounded up, and escorted back to France. The Swiss government justified its draconian immigration laws by claiming that subversive agents were entering the country among the refugees, that the Swiss people might lose jobs to the immigrants, and that many immigrants, would not move on to third countries. As such, a ban was imposed upon any refugee or migrant engaging in any professional activity, paid or unpaid. Still, these policies were deeply unpopular among many of the Swiss population, and over the war many refugees, including women and children, were able to cross the border and shelter in camps. By May 1945, the Swiss were holding over 115,000 people in refugee camps across the country. Throughout 1943, the Swiss were dealing with a developing situation on both sides of the conflict. Allied intelligence networks, such as the Office of Strategic Services, established in Bern, were actively gathering information about the Nazis and helping resistance cells adjacent to the Swiss border. On the other hand, Axis military developments found the Swiss becoming more concerned about the possibility of a German invasion. General Guisan, especially, had become alarmed by rumors of Fortress Europe, a planned German ring defense of its core European territories based out of the Alps. Despite Switzerland's official policy of neutrality, they couldn't help but find themselves shifting over to the Allied side of the line, something that German aggression certainly did not help amend. When the Allies landed in Sicily, the threat of invasion again loomed as Germans occupying northern Italy looked to secure supply lines to their troops. Railway tunnels running between Italy and Germany through the Swiss border became crucial targets for the Wehrmacht. In response, the Swiss warned the Germans that these tunnels would be destroyed if they dared to invade. Relations with the Axis declined, but the latter end of the war saw damaged relations with the Allies as well. Prior to the commencement of Operation Overlord in 1944, Allied bombers had pounded Germany's occupied zones continuously in order to weaken them. A side effect of this came with further intrusions into Swiss airspace, including more accidental bombardments of Swiss targets. During this period, the Swiss press changed its once friendly tone towards Britain into a slew of denunciations, mostly due to the high civilian casualties caused by RAF mistakes. The United States Air Force was not innocent of these violations either, as many B-17 and B-24 bombers were forcefully evicted by Swiss aircraft. In one terrible misfortune, 40 Swiss civilians were reported killed and over 270 seriously wounded when 30 B-24 bombers dropped incendiary bombs over the city of Schaffhausen. As the war pushed further into the German heartland, Switzerland attempted to maintain the integrity of its borders, preventing any advancing Allied armies from using their territory as strategic shortcuts to push quickly into the Reich. Despite shaky relations between the two sides, the Swiss held firm, standing by cautiously as the Allies steamrolled into the bombed-out ruins of Nazi Germany. Altogether, Switzerland invested a total of 8 billion Swiss francs in its defenses, accruing a national debt of 9 billion Swiss francs by 1945. But with its infrastructure intact, Switzerland experienced a rapid economic upswing, contributing 200 million Swiss francs to the rebuilding of neighboring war-damaged countries. Despite strict immigration laws, they had also given refuge to some 300,000 people. While Switzerland's neutral position has not always been met positively by other nations, armed neutrality was the best strategy the Swiss could pursue in order to remain independent from German rule.